Hi
Hi
everyone.
there.
Yeah, hi Deanna. Excited to be here. Deanna Brown with me. Deanna, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. As mentioned, my name is Deanna Brown. I am the president and director of a new company called FC32, which stands for Football Club 32.
Hmm.
And I'm probably, as they say in America, an OG, 37 years media and entertainment, including the most recent 2 to 3 years in actively in sports and
Hmm.
specifically football, which is, as the Americans know it, is soccer, but here in Europe, it's we call it football. And so we can talk obviously more about that in a moment.
You consider yourself European already?
I know I live in Europe primarily, but no, I'm American. I'm born and raised in the U.S. But the minute you spend a fair amount of time across, you start to pick up word choices and even sort of lifestyle differences that make me, yeah, a bit European. I think the appreciation for soccer, but
Hmm.
calling it football, is just based on probably 30 years of being a huge fan of the
Hmm.
sport. So, regardless of location, to me, it's
Hmm.
football. But when we talk to Americans, we have to qualify and say it's soccer.
Okay, awesome. So you've mentioned that you're leading a company, FC32, and could you
Yep.
tell us about what you guys do? What is the mission?
Yeah. So our mission and vision is that players and or people are benefited by both companies and products and services that serve them as a pathway to learning, to cultural differences, to sort of appreciation of life. So we see football as a passport to a brilliant and exciting life. Our specific business is to acquire football clubs, very
Hmm.
explicit clubs in a certain level of the football ecosystem. And with a club acquisition, we're acquiring a men's team and a women's team. And traditionally, we look at highly involved communities around those clubs. But by acquiring them and then managing them slightly different than the current system, we think we can benefit both shareholder and constituent, aka the teams and their players, better or differently by focusing on a single proposition, which is the proposition being, if you treat the core asset as the player or the
Hmm.
human being, you start to make many decisions differently that ultimately benefit the player, but also ultimately benefit the business, and then last but not least, benefit the ecosystem. So we
Hmm.
think that traditional investors and even owners, let alone operators, are focused on the business of a sporting event or a sporting club, as opposed to and considering the primary business being the athlete or the player. And so
Hmm.
that's where we have a sort of a fundamental difference. So we think about the business plan differently, we think about the sporting plan differently, we think about the commercial plan differently, because we consider the asset to be the player and not, as they say, the club or the team.
So your approach is people first.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so can we say that, like, from your broad experience, right? You've mentioned that you're 37 years already in the management and working
Yeah.
in companies. Can we say that you bring this experience from, general big, huge companies where you worked at, to a sports world, to a football world, where you bring your experience of people management, of understanding the psychology here
Mm-hmm.
to sports?
Yeah, I think let me agree and also give you some more context for it. So one of the reasons I joined a sporting organization or moved into sports almost 3.5 years ago was that I was in the music business at the time, and I was seeing fandom, if you will, consumers change behaviorally through digital media and through globalization of personal brands, through seeing the creator economy come to rise pretty much out of nowhere. I was seeing a number of trends that suggested that the sort of fan experience or fan appreciation was not around a team or even a region or even a club. It was more about a player. And when the player would move teams, their fan base would go with them. And I thought that that was really quite interesting from a business perspective as somebody who appreciates brands and commercial and marketing, let alone digital media. I thought this is really interesting because it speaks to the trends and the benefits of the internet and the digital age. It also is tangentially adjacent to the, as I mentioned, the creator economy and even fan experiences. But I was also seeing it be a generational sort of attitude that one could see or witness as a manager of clubs or teams, or even more in this particular context for me, in music companies, publishing companies, media companies, is that when you spoke to people in their 20s and 30s about their engagement in their particular profession or workplace, I was seeing that they too were less appreciative of the locality or region of the work or even the type of work, but they were more interested in the relationships and how they were being treated, let's say, as employees. And so I was thinking that if you could build loyalty and engagement for the employees through treating them differently and developing them as the asset of a company, especially an entrepreneurial company, if you thought about a football club or a team as a type of company, imagine what type of engagement and loyalty you might get from a player if you again developed. I was seeing parallels to leadership and mentorship in a company as much as I was seeing possibly leadership and mentorship in a sporting organization. And so I had this consumer facing fan experience that was new and very kind of player centric. And then I was thinking engagement and loyalty, and ultimately we'll call it performance, both work of performance and player performance. Similarly, when you put the focus on the individual, right? And so there were too many parallels for me to ignore this, right? I thought to myself, there's something here that could be integral to how I consider sort of what I do as a quote mentor, leader, entrepreneur, right? Which is to say, the best performances were coming from the people that we could engage because we took a very bespoke and individual approach to their growth in their environments. And I saw the parallels being pretty strong. So if I mentored or engaged employees one-on-one, and I could do that at scale, I saw that play out very positively. I knew that based on my partnership with Paul Francis, who was the sporting side of our business, who's the CEO of the company, I knew his expertise around developing players on a pitch, in the context of a sporting environment. He could develop players based on the same thesis, and I could develop those same players off the pitch, sort of in life, and again, similar to how I would mentor or grow an employee at a company. So there were again a lot of parallels, and there was another one fortunate thing about our business that's unique. And between a business model and approach that was differentiated in a very exciting and hot and dynamic market, we had the makings of a great, new business. And we say that the level of innovation, or the innovation, was really in plain sight, right? So if I said to you, hey, we're going to treat the employees with respect, and we're going to treat them uniquely as their own, and we're going to invest in them and develop them, you would be like, well, that sounds great. And then if I said to you, that's true of a sporting club as well, you'd be like, okay, that makes sense. And then when I tell you there's a $10 billion transfer market that rewards individual development of players, that's growing 9% a year in the European football market, I say, okay, there's your business model, right? So it's one thing to have a concept that you think will grow the business and ultimately grow the industry, and happens to be benevolent, aka introducing and growing people, human development. But then another thing to say, hey, I actually have a fourth revenue stream or a business model that supports this even further. So it was the makings of a perfect storm of opportunity.
That's really interesting approach. So I would say, what my question to you, like, what exactly do you do to develop people better? What different? Yeah,
Excuse
bless
me.
you. No problem.
Yeah.
What differentiates you from, let's say, other clubs who are, already trying to be, positive, how to say,
Yeah.
to create a positive reinforcements in the teams, who are already trying to be friendly with the players? What is differentiating you from, general clubs?
I would say currently most ownership of clubs in the tiers that we're talking about. So we're not talking about the Premier Leagues or even the Bundesliga or the Serie A or even the La Liga. We're talking about that tier one, League Ones, League Twos, etc. That tier of ownership is explicitly high net worth individuals or family offices. And it's a generational ownership position where the owners are very sophisticated in their core business or financial management, but they're less knowledgeable around media and entertainment and sort of the growing business of the sport, right? And they typically will hire second and third generation coaches and sporting directors who have been increasingly involved in the business for 2 and 3 decades, right? And they're very single minded around one goal, which is to win trophies, right? And if you said to them, we have an opportunity to develop your players and ultimately move them from lower tier teams up through a pathway system, we would advance them to a positive effect at some point outside the our ecosystem of multiple clubs. They would say, well, why would I move my best players? The transfer market is solely for me to buy players when I have injured players or retired players or players don't work out. That my single focus as a sporting director, as an owner, is to win trophies. When I turn the sort of my goal is to take a roster of 22 players and over the course of 5 years, move 5 of those players up to higher valued clubs and then ultimately exit them from our system for multiples on their acquisition price, and that I'm developing those individuals, that returns on my investment while not denigrating the ability for the coaches to perform their job, which is to move the team forward. The motivation's different and the business is evolving. And so when we go back to my background for a second, spending so much time in digital media, film and television and music, I would say to you, I have an appreciation for the media value of the player and of the club. And that's not affected by a specific player moving. And Paul Francis, who's the CEO of the company who's on the sporting side, would say to you, he's got 11 players on the field and 11 players waiting to get on the field. That dynamic suggests that 3 to 5 of them can move and be impactful one year and move, and still there will be 18 to 20 some odd behind them that have a similar playing style and ultimately could move up into those spots that are going away. So those are the kinds of conversations that are different than what the current ownership set is thinking. I will tell you that there are lots of clubs who do try to develop players, but their systems are more what we call ladders, which is you come in from academy, you go up or you go out. Right? Whereas we might say you might come in from our academies, you move over to a team over here because of your background, your desire to play there, your history, your style of play, and somebody else on the same team might move over this way and they will make these shifting moves up. And so the goal isn't necessarily to exit you if you don't go straight up. It's more of a graduated approach to it, and it's a more person-to-person approach to it. So it requires a little bit more work on an individual level, meaning we look at the 22-player roster and each person has a specific plan around their development. And what's very timely in this conversation, and it's true probably for the last few years, is that there's so much data available through sort of global analytics and predictive analytics. You can actually have a different program for myself and a different program for you and a different program for the other person on the other side of you, because there is, we can ask the machines, we can really develop a data fingerprint for you and ultimately coach you explicitly around your development, because we have the advantages of data and science. And that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And while many clubs are using data, they're still holistically using data not to promote players, but to win matches, right? So it's very different in that quote why, and
Mm-hmm.
it's very different in how. So
Mm-hmm.
while the outcome may seem the same, right? We want to get players promoted, slash we want to get teams to win. It's really the how and the why, or the why and the
Mm-hmm.
how, if you would put it in the right order.
Okay, yeah, that's really this way of thinking is completely like different from, general sport ownerships and general businessmen in sports. So I'm curious, how do you find clients, right? And how do you explain people to those second leagues, right? To these family offices, to those people are probably with a fixed mindset as well, that you are developing something new, the new system, and how you basically, make them believe you, and how do you prove that your system will work?
Well, there's a couple of things happening also in the market that I think is relevant here. One is that many of the, as I mentioned, the family offices and the families that own these clubs, they have a generational transition that's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, their grandfather bought the club, the father
Mm-hmm.
has been running the club or managing the club,
Mm-hmm.
and the children may not be interested in holding the club, right, as
Mm-hmm.
owners. So there's a market there where ownership is shifting, and the definition of success is shifting
Mm-hmm.
around ownership. So that makes it, for a straight up, someone wants to sell their club, they're very open to having a conversation with us. There are other people who want to hold on to the club in some kind of capacity, but they may feel as though the club management has become much more costly than they had been 10 years ago. It may be more sophisticated from a data and analytics, let alone a media or entertainment property. And so there may be things about running the club that have changed or evolved, and they're welcoming partnership, right? Because they're thinking, if we can have that expertise in our club and our community that the bigger clubs have, in the bigger cities, why wouldn't we give up sort of some ownership, if not control, of the operating side, right? Because their interest is really to be a member of the community, and obviously they have a love of the sport. So being involved in the community and being involved in the sport is not something we're looking to take away from them. So partnership is also an opportunity. And then lastly, I would say in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been new ownership that thought that sports was a quick, easy asset class, and they got involved and they found it to be more than they thought from an operating perspective. And so they too are looking for some kind of partnership or even exit. So the what I'm teasing out here, which I think is relevant, is we're owners, but we're also operators.
Mm-hmm.
And we're operators who want or require an ownership position. So
Mm-hmm.
you have people out there trying to operate clubs, and you have people out there trying to own clubs. That we're somewhat unique in the fact that we want to own and operate.
Do you invest your own funds, or do you have investors back? Because it's a huge, amount of money to buy football clubs.
Well, there's a couple of things in that. One is yes and yes. Yes, we have some of our own money involved. Yes, we have over 60 different individual investors, many of which who are athletes themselves, maybe not soccer or football players, but professional athletes. And what's true of them, as you can imagine, is they understand the idea of the investment. They understand about the asset class being the athlete versus the club or team. The third thing you mentioned, which is kind of a misnomer, which is that the perception that these clubs are very expensive, when in fact they're traditionally just a multiple of their revenue or their commercial value, right? The difference between the top clubs and the tiers that we're talking about that are sort of more community oriented, they could range from 2 million US dollars on the top line to 8 to 10 million on the top line. So
Mm-hmm.
when you think about them as a multiple of that revenue, those teams could be trading at 2 or 3 million US dollars, or they could be trading at 15 to 20 million, but they're not hundreds of millions of dollars or euros for a small piece. They are, in fact, quite affordable. And then I would say we're very fortunate that we've been able to really partner with both capital partners as well as the teams themselves and the current owners to say, how do we move this forward from a deal perspective where they get the advantage of having owners and operators at the table that have a specific approach that's unique? And on the other hand, how much of these companies or entities do we need to own in order to operate the business and return value to our shareholders and to ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and once a club becomes part of a multiple club organization, or what's known as an MCO, once a club becomes that, it actually trades up from 2x revenue to 4 or even 6 times revenue, because the idea that this is a system of how to operate versus a standalone has efficiencies and synergies.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how many clubs in your portfolio currently?
Yeah, we currently have 3 clubs in probably the last 6 to 8 months of acquisition, and we've started to operate 2 of the clubs. We're starting to onboard the 3rd club. Currently, we look to probably adding 2 more clubs this year, so a total of 5 in 2025. And it's likely that we have a flywheel effect at somewhere around 7 to 8 clubs, which would be likely to be our target for 2026. So we look to own somewhere between 7 to 10 to 9 clubs in capacity. And as I said, we're well on our way with the 3 clubs that we currently are sitting in a sort of ownership or operating position.
You basically do not look to have more than 9. You want to have a portfolio, let's say, of 10 clubs or 9 clubs, and work closely with them and develop the systems over there. What is the vision for a company?
Well, I mean, 9 sounds like 9 is a number where the synergies and the regions of the world that we're able to have both efficiencies and be effective in is 3 or 4 areas. If we wanted to expand to other parts of the world, let's say outside the continent, let's use South America as an example, let's use Pan-Asia as an example. If we were to go into those parts of the world, Australia, New Zealand, those would be outside of the 9. But when we look at the European, Portugal, Spain, the UK, Austria, Scandinavia, and then into, Germany and the sort of that direction, let's call those 3 regions or part of the larger continent, that's where the 9 teams would exist. And there's ability culturally and people-wise to be able to move people through these 3 sort of regions. If we move to these other parts of the world, we would likely want 2 or 3 clubs in each of these areas so that we'd have those cultural references, those abilities to put people on the ground in those countries or in those areas so that they could, in fact, sort of implore / develop those markets for the people that are involved.
And what do you... Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so what do you see, like what countries, let's say, do you see the difference in mentality in different countries? And do you see, let's say, your approach working better in, let's say, in Spain and Portugal, and maybe not that good in England?
Well, there's 2 answers to that question. There's one answer that is countries and regions that have what we call deep tables, meaning 20 teams in the top tier or 10 or 12 teams in the top tier is more advantageous for us than somebody who has 3 or 4 teams in the top tier, right? Because you want to have a disparity between the top of the tier and the bottom of the tier. The second thing you want to be sort of mindful of, because by the way, the price and the value is significantly less expensive at the bottom of the table than it is at the top, but you have an opportunity to play the top and to engage the top or engage the full league, if you will, and spend much less money to have those players have those experiences in those higher table matches. You want to find teams that have a very strong community component to it, because those are teams and communities that they're fairly stable, because they have a repeated history of having wins and losses and still turning up, right, for matches, right? Because the game is as much about ideally having a winning club, but it's as much about really building an environment where they are engaged in the success, but also in the product, regardless of a sporting particular outcome. The other thing that we look for, though, with that stability in that tier, we also look for clubs that are break even or near profitable. And the rationale being is we're going to invest on top of that, as opposed to investing to sort of fix their losses, right? And it's not uncommon for soccer teams or football clubs in some of these markets to be very unprofitable, because they're much of a, let's call it a vanity opportunity to have a fancy team and a fancy club and what have you. And they've gotten a bit away from the sport and away from what is that community. So we like community involvement, stable clubs, break even if possible, and we like deep tables. What we do shy away from are the top tier of teams. Let's call those the European Premier Leagues. Let's call that the Bundesliga. Let's call that La Liga, because those top teams are customers of ours as they buy our players out of lower academies and systems, right? So we don't want to compete with ourselves, right? So if we had an ownership position, a small one, in a large EPL club, that would be perceived as a conflict if we were to talk to selling a player to another EPL club. So we sort of say south of that level, both because, value versus capital expense, and then the idea that those are our customers, right? And so we'll stay below that tier. And then you do have country league rules and laws around the ability to move players in and out based on visas, how many home or national players have to be on the field at any given time. So certain leagues will allow you to have what we call 11 passports on the field at the same time, which means you could have, out of your roster of 22, you could have 10 players that are coming from a different country. And the league would not restrict you to say in every match you have to have a certain number of players in that. And then some countries, depending on who's in power politically speaking, have more stringent visa and, work passwords and, work passes. So those things do affect our business, right? So if we want to bring a player in from Austria and move them to Ireland, Ireland's quite favorable to allowing passports from other countries. So some other countries are less so. And then I do believe there are places where, and we're a multinational group of investors. So I happen to be American, but my co-founder is Australian. We've got investors who are Swedish and Scandinavian and Italian and Austrian. Yeah, I said that. So we have a group from all over, not just America. So and we speak probably a dozen languages between all of us, but it is nice to have a place or a country where internationals are coming in are well received, right? And are seen favorable, as opposed to some markets, they may not, language or business style may not be as welcoming.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Diana. This was really interesting, and I'm pretty sure that it's really useful to those who are listening to us, because, for example, I have never knew that people are doing something like this, and that people are bringing approach like from different areas, from different business industries into the sport. And what's most important, and I think you are taking the just understanding of a human mind and psychology, you're bringing this into the sports, and you're basically proving that it will help businesses to grow faster and better.
Yeah, I really do think, go back to our mission we mentioned up front, which is we see sport as a passport to
Mm-hmm.
develop and an opportunity to develop people. And I would say to you, having been in a number of different industries with a unique sort of personal positioning on how I manage and how we think about that, that if you invest money, education, time, any kind of resource in an employee, a partner, a player, sort of any spectrum of human being, if you invest in that relationship will pay back. Right, that's my
Mm-hmm.
experience. And I think for many reasons, the least of which is having a quarterly results driven Wall Street, that in America we have a tendency to be very, short-term mindset as
Mm-hmm.
businesses because we have to deliver a result every 90 days to Wall Street, right? And if even if you're privately held, there's still a perception of a quarterly delivery, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't really allow you to think and invest in people
Mm-hmm.
over a period of time. And for us, it could be a 2-year window, or it could be the timeline of a player's career, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
could be 8 to 10 years, right? I'm spending time right now looking at academy systems and how to
Mm-hmm.
develop, in particular, girls or women into women.
Mm-hmm.
So from ages 8 to 18, what does that look like from a development, both physically and from a personal maturation standpoint?
Mm-hmm.
How does a girl grow and start in sports at 8, and why does she likely at 12 or 14 stop playing sports? But if we
Mm-hmm.
can get her to continue to play sports 14, 16, 18, what is likely to happen on to her life then versus the girl who stops at 8 or 10 years of age? Why do they stop, and how can they, what's the likely outcome if they continue? And so just keeping girls engaged in sports is a personal goal of mine, because there are things that sports as a woman teach you, and prepare you. And if I can
Mm-hmm.
add through our programs, education, additional resources, life skills, whatever it is that sort of helps these girls grow up, and they have the attention of the sporting staff and of the business teams and of the marketing teams, if they have this sort of opportunity to grow and they have that support system, it's likely we're going to have more and more successful women in the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let alone in the sporting market, right? So
Mm-hmm.
sporting market's a very obvious correlation from investment early on. But when those girls stop playing sports for whatever reason, they go into the workplace, they're going to be better
Mm-hmm.
prepared based on their years playing sport with us. So investing in people is not a new concept. Actually doing it takes a high degree of commitment,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes a group of people to have both a way of doing it that is very accountable,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to have the commitment to doing it, not just for a year or two, but over the course of the history of a business. And I think that's what you get when you speak to our investors, and when you speak
Mm-hmm.
to my business partner, is you get the sense that they are investing over a window of time as opposed to a short-term
Mm-hmm.
return. And I think you also very much get a dedication and a passion that comes from a body of work or a lifetime of work
Mm-hmm.
or entrepreneurialism that will really sort of be able to not just imagine a world, but actually sort of deliver that world.
Yeah, that's a powerful mission. And we are about to end the recording. I want to ask you
Okay,
a couple questions, these questions.
sure.
First one, what is your favorite sport?
Football. That's easy.
Soccer.
Soccer. Yes.
All right, who is your favorite player?
It's very difficult to say. I think it depends on the country and the time of year. I enjoy watching Samantha Kerr. I'm looking forward to her coming back on the pitch at Chelsea this soon, because she's been out and she's been injured. I collectively love to watch the Spanish national team, in particular the group that won the World Cup. I think that was just a lot of fun and excitement. In the US, I'm a big Trinity Rodman fan, just
Mm-hmm.
because of her sort of dynamic on and off the field personality and
Mm-hmm.
the like. So, it's a collection. I think in any given day, I can find somebody I enjoy watching on a soccer field somewhere. So, it's I try not to pick favorites.
Okay, what is the favorite part of your job?
I think I have I enjoy having conversations with players when they come into our sort of ecosystem or onto one of our teams, and you ask them a very simple question, which is, where do you want to play when you grow up? What's your dream? And they will tell you they want to own a soccer club in Italy, or they'll tell you they want to play, they're a striker and they want to play in the World Cup, or they'll tell you that they want to win a national championship or a regional championship in their hometown and they want their parents in the stadium, right? So my favorite job is just hearing the dreams of these players and knowing that we have the potential to actually deliver that, right? And that makes all the extra hours doing all the tasks that are not as much fun so much more rewarding, because you're doing more than building a business and returning shareholder value. You're doing both of those things, but you're helping people grab and capture their dreams. And that's just probably one of the biggest rewards in life, let alone in sport.
And what is the most, what sucks in your job, okay? What you don't like? What is the hardest part?
I spend a lot of time on airplanes that I don't particularly like, but I think that's probably, getting from one part of the world to the other part of the world via an airplane, commercial air flight is not fun anymore. So that's probably the least fun part of my job, which is travel.
Okay, and what advice would you give to younger generation and to someone who is trying to build business in sports, right? What advice would you give? Fun advice.
I think that I would, two pieces. One, I would ask them to be very discerning, or suggest that they be very discerning about what organization they join, right? Most people who are joining sports organizations have a collection of opportunities. And so I think picking the right organization for what your goals are is one advice, one bit. And then I would say the other hand, I would sort of try to move in to an organization and find an organization that fits for you, and then get in and roll up your sleeves and be very active and curious and listen to people, because I think there's a variety of generations and voices and expertise in almost every sporting company I've looked at. And there are paths where you can learn a lot of things about sports, but also about life. And I think there's a lot of executives that are currently working in those organizations that can help lift these younger generations up. And I think you'd be surprised on where you get the advice from and what the counsel from, because it could be from any number of places. So I would encourage them to pick the right organization for them and what their personal goals are. And then once they're in the organization, I would roll the sleeves up and get to work and spend a fair amount of time listening and asking questions and kind of learning, because there will be a point where you're going to be asked to return that favor and guide other people. But in this early part of your career, my best advice to someone is to get involved and be very active, but ask a lot of questions and wait for the answers.
Diana, thank you so much. Like a lot of experience you shared, and then a lot of, I will say, practical leadership knowledge you've said here, and it was great to have you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Good questions as well from you.
Thank you so much.